Hello everyone, this is Tom Uren. I'm here with Grugq from another Between Two Nerds discussion. G'day Grugq, how are you?
Good day, Tom. Fine, and yourself?
I'm well. This week's episode is brought to you by Tines. Tines makes a AI and workflow automation platform. I've got a discussion with Matt Muller of Tines out on the podcast feed this week, so be sure to catch that. So Grugq, something has been bothering you for a very long time, and that is, why do cyber attacks have to be mean? So you were telling me before we started that you've been thinking about this since 2017?
Yeah, that's when it first occurred to me, is this sort of why are we so fixated on destruction and just like why are we trying to do these mean things to people? Like, we've got cyber, we can do anything, so why not be nice?
So why is it always Cyber Pearl Harbor rather than Cyber Christmas or
Cyber Oprah Winfrey show? You get a car. Yeah, it's like, why do you have to be mean? Like, that's so like. So to me, it seems that the way to achieve change with a group of people is not necessarily to be mean to everyone.
Right. Okay.
So
if you attack people, typically they band together and push back. Right. You unify them against a common enemy.
Exactly. Right. So sort of thinking like, what's a way to avoid that? Like, how can you defeat that? And what sort of spurred me to think about this was I was speaking to a professor of like anthropology or something like that. He had this comment of like, if the Iranians wiped out student debt, I would be happy for my students. I wouldn't be advocating an invasion.
Right.
And that was sort of this like, yeah, that's actually a much better idea, because politically, how do you generate anger for a nice thing? Right. It's very hard to do. But on thinking about it more, I realized that it wasn't a sort of one-sided nice thing. The way that it works is it creates this zero-sum game that the society has to play with itself. So a zero-sum game is one where for me to win, you have to lose. And, for you to win, I have to lose. There's no win-win situation here. So by looking at a society and finding these sort of internal contradictions or these inequalities that exist, but are just accepted as part of the status quo, if you can find ways to sort of pressurize them in order to fix the situation you've created, they have to play a zero-sum game.
Right.
So with the example of like student debt, it means that the banks are losing money. Right, like they have lost and the students have gained, and society has gained as well, I would say. But the banks have lost. And so how do you resolve that? Right? Do you, as a politician, for example, do you come out and campaign on restoring debt to your constituents and getting money for the bankers? Like, that doesn't seem like a winning campaign strategy. But on the other hand, the bankers are the ones that bankroll the campaign, right? So the politician is sort of caught between this difficult situation of, on the one side, the people who pay for him have lost money, but on the other hand, the people who vote for him have gained money.
Yep. So you're not describing an entirely, like, it's not a free gift. I guess it's a gift that exposes the fissures in society. Is
right.
Like, that's the point of what you're trying to get at. Is that
exactly.
right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, pretty much. And that, there'd be another example would be, for example, so the UK has got like the lowest welfare payments for single mothers in all of Europe. So if you broke into like the UK government and you issued press releases saying, we are, rectifying this great injustice. Here are all of these studies that show that when you're paying single mothers to stay at home and take care of their kids, you have better school outcomes, you have better attendance, better grades, better graduation rates. all of this stuff. So we are investing in our future with a view to like growing the economy in the next 10 years, blah, 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 blah. Like all of this stuff that's just backed up by studies. You do that, and at the same time, you like double the payments, just to whatever it is to bring it up to the median for Europe. Not like the best, but just not the worst anymore, right? So then you've put the government in a position where they've come out and stated a logical, clear case to everyone about why they should do the thing they've done. You've actually done it so that you've, implemented policy for them. And then you leave it to them to figure out what to do. Do they go to all of these, single mothers and welfare and say, like, actually, you have to give us the money back? Right? Like, that's not going to be particularly easy to pull off. But, you've the problem is like they would just do it because that's the world we live in, and everyone would be like, yeah, that's what's going to happen. Like the government's going to crush you. Like, what are you going to do?
I mean, that seems like a very multifaceted campaign, and if you were going to carry it off entirely in cyber operations, it would be difficult to do.
Right.
I'm sort of fascinated with the idea, but I struggle to see where you could practically apply it. And I kind of think that if you could practically apply it, wouldn't someone have done it by now?
I don't know. I mean,
I have heard of, is it Fin7? I think they used to also be called Carbonac, and they would alter the bank balance of accounts, increase them, and then they would just take out the money. So, in fact, the account holder
it is a gift
did not
if
lose
you think
money.
about it.
But that's not exactly the same as...
The thing is, like, banks have... banks have a way of, if they accidentally give you too much money, then...
they can claw it back.
Right. But I think it's difficult if you do it in other ways. So one of the attacks that sort of makes sense to me would be if you go after a very large company that has narrow margins, or even one that doesn't, and then you go after their finance department and you just give everyone a $1 per hour pay raise right before payday. So you go and you make this thing, you disable any of the checks in place. People get paid for not a huge amount of money more, but for someone who's making, very low hourly wage, an extra $1 an hour is a significant amount of money. Whereas for the business, it's not the end of the world, right? Like it would impact their margins by some amount, but not massively. But you've now created a situation where does the business go to all of the employees and say, we gave you too much money, next paycheck, we're going to not pay you that amount, to compensate for whatever we gave you? Do they go to the government and say, like, this was an attack, we want to be compensated for what we've lost? Do they write it off? It puts them in a difficult position of where do they go. And I think that would create it would highlight a contradiction, it would highlight a fissure, and that would allow a different vector of attack. If you now went to organizing to have the $1 an hour raise made permanent, that would be a thing that you could promote, and it would have much more traction.
Yeah.
But that's it does end up becoming this sort of not necessarily convoluted, but there seems to be too many layers for it to actually have a proper impact.
Right. Yeah. So in that example, it's hard to know what effect you would have.
Right.
So one of I think it was the National Cyber Force, the UK's National Cyber Force. They wrote what I thought of as a white paper about offensive cyber. And their sort of three principles, I think, would be targeted, tailored, and precise.
Mm-hmm.
That's one principle expressed three ways. But
Yeah, yeah.
one of the
I mean,
one of the points was to do something that would have an effect that they could predict.
mm-hmm.
Whereas being nice, I like I said, I like the idea of trying to expose fishes, but it's opaque to me what the actual outcome would be.
Right. So I
you could just force
don't think
people
it's
to like each other, which is like, I don't know. That's probably not what I wanted.
Yeah. Send out Hallmark cards for everyone's birthday,
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think part of the problem is it doesn't necessarily have a visible effect, and any effect it does have is unpredictable, which is sort of part of what you're doing, right? You're taking a chaotic system and applying pressure somewhere. Like, you're going to get chaos because that's what you started out with, right? The results are unpredictable, but I think that if your point of view is, China is my enemy, anything that makes China less stable is good for me, I will do that, right? And so you find ways to create these situations within China. I can see that as being viewed as an approach that some governments would take, because why not, right?
Yeah, and so I guess if it's a long-term, many opportunities to introduce that kind of discord.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a gift that causes discord, I think, is the
it's like the golden apple of the Trojan War, which it was thrown between the three goddesses, and it says "for the fairest." So the three goddesses have to choose which one deserves the golden apple. Right, like that's sort of what you're doing. Is like someone's going to get a golden apple, but it's going to piss off everyone else. Right. I see it sort of, you're doing that, like someone comes out ahead, but in doing so, other people lose.
Yeah. So one of the pieces of news that came out of China some time ago now was that I presume it was the rocket force, that some of their missiles were fueled with water, I think was the story. And that struck me as the sort of story which would be quite effective in undermining confidence within the Chinese leadership, that we've got a rocket force that can actually do the job that we want, whatever that job was.
Right.
And so, I was thinking to myself, well, is that some kind of operation? You could very easily imagine that leaking that material to the press, or giving it to the press, if it's secret intelligence, would be actually, this is worthwhile. It's harder to imagine that they actually created the situation in the first place, but not impossible, with a human agent in the right place. And that seemed to me the sort of operation that a planner could go, okay, step 1, step 2, undermine confidence, step 3, off we go. Sign.
Yeah. Well, I'd also point out that the Vietnam War, particularly when it was the Indochina War, Vo Nguyen Giap, the general under Ho Chi Minh, who was in charge of the Viet Minh army that destroyed the French at Dien Bien Phu during the Indochina War. His book on this basically points out that the way that they defeated the French was by exploiting inherent contradictions. So his thing was that the contradiction that they faced was, as a colonial power, they couldn't, they didn't have a large army. So they would either have to spread out in order to provide protection everywhere, in which case they were spread thin, and so they could be defeated in detail. You could just pick off these smaller isolated areas. Or they would have to concentrate, and if they concentrated, then they couldn't defend all the other areas that they were no longer in. So that this inherent contradiction that he was exploiting the entire time And I think that that sort of view can be applied to this thinking of like, if you can find an inherent contradiction that you can exploit, it's worth considering that you don't need to exploit it by destroying things.
Right. Okay. So the examples that you've given me,
none of them make any sense.
Exactly. And so, now, on the other hand, I'm not convinced that the real-world examples of offensive cyber operations that we have, which are kind of the large-scale attempted destructive ones, none of them really seem to have paid off. Some of them seem to have come close. Now, like I said, that white paper from the UK's Cyber Force, that to me seemed like, yes, spot on. This is the sort of thing we're after. Or
I agree.
would make
But
sense,
I think,
maybe. Not what we're after, but makes sense.
right.
And
One
some
of the
of
things
the
that
other
they pointed out, though, was that it works against small groups.
Yes.
That was... Right.
Yeah. So cyber gifting, you think, would work against larger groups? Is that your...
I think it could.
Where does it fit into this sort of paradigm between, very
it's new
tightly...
and it's better.
Between, on one hand, the very small-scale tailored, tiny effects that have hopefully predictable outcomes on small groups, the destructive stuff that is destructive but doesn't seem to have been so far all that effective. Like, this is a third way you're proposing.
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm rounding out the possibilities and exploring. Like, I want to explore the idea of using cyber for things other than replicating military kinetic operations. Right? And I think that it's worth looking at cyber as what are things that you can do in cyber that you can't do anywhere else. Right. So if you look at cyber as, well, it's a way that we can destroy things and still recover them quickly. Like, yes, that takes advantage of one of the properties of cyber, and that it's sort of, it's like soft and can be reversed. But that's very minimal thinking. Like, you're not really exploring what you can do with cyber. You're just looking at like, how is cyber like artillery system but different?
Yep.
And I think that that's a limited, linkered view. So I'm very much interested in things like using cyber to create situations that manipulate social dynamics, which I think is an interesting approach. It's been viewed purely through the lens of information warfare so far. That it's always been, if we lie to people online, then we can change how they behave. And that's certainly true, but that's not the only thing that you can do to change people. Like, people respond to incentives, right? So I think that there's, I think there's more to cyber
right,
than is dreamt of in your philosophy, is where I'm getting at with that. And I think that this approach explores one of those options. Like, all of the literature is basically about assume that you're a state and you're facing another state. What's the things that you can do to each other? And like, that's ignoring the majority of cyber, I think. That there's just so much more out there, like non-state actors, things other than attacks. There's just so much to be done. And I think that this, like cyber gifting, or cyber discord attack, it provides, while maybe not a practical formula that you can implement, it at least forces thinking outside of the paradigm of, destroy, deny, disrupt.
So one thing that occurred to me as you were speaking is that I read an academic paper quite a long time ago where they had given Chinese netizens behind the Great Firewall access. I can't remember if it was to VPNs or what it was, but it basically provided the people in the study with access to uncensored news from Western sources. And the details escape me, but they managed to create some premise where it wasn't clear that the point of the study was to give you uncensored news and then see what you thought about it. And it seemed like sort of breaking down the Great Firewall in that sort of subtle way where people don't know that that's the point. That might actually be some sort of cyber gift that could fall into the category that you're talking about. But again, in that example of undermining the Great Firewall, it's not clear to me what you would get out of it. Yeah, like it seems like there's the friend of my enemy is my enemy. Like the Chinese government spends time and effort maintaining the Great Firewall. Therefore, it must be good for me if it breaks down. But I don't know that that is actually true. And what would I get out of it?
I think
like I might get political discord in China that might distract them from doing other things. Does it actually benefit me? No, I don't know.
That was kind of the theory behind Radio Free Europe and
Voice of America and
all of these things of like, if you can just get true information to the population under an authoritarian regime, that will inspire them to something. Like that was sort of the, and it seems like a lot of that is based on the experience of World War II, where you had like the BBC secretly broadcasting into France, occupied France, for example. And I'm not sure it's a direct parallel. I think that there's, I do believe that there's merit to it, and I think from speaking with people who were there, like there was value that they got out of having the sort of unbiased news, but I don't think it played such a major role in
winning the war.
Yeah. But I mean, on the other hand, it's quite cheap to do, and it's good for the people. So maybe,
Yeah, but and I like the idea as well. But you probably don't need a cyber operation to do it, right?
Right.
You probably just need I
mean, these days you kind of do, right? I mean, I think one of the problems with a lot of this, like if we can just get them the right information, is it's based very much on the theory that other people want to be Americans. They just need the opportunity, right?
Yes.
So if you can just give them enough stuff that they can become Americans, they will do that spontaneously.
Yeah, give them enough blue jeans and
right, exactly.
nylons.
Like it's the Full Metal Jacket quote by the Colonel. Inside every indigenous Vietnamese is an American trying to get out.
Okay, so we've kicked around some ideas about what a cyber gift might look like, and to be honest, still none of them sound all that compelling to me. So, what's the problem with the current strategic thinking in the cyber operations space?
Yeah, so I think it's a lot of it comes from the sort of the original sin of American strategic cyber thought, which is that they've read Clausewitz and they saw like, okay, there's the center of gravity, and you sort of, there's this something about politics, but you can kind of ignore that. But it's about destroying the will of the enemy. So destroying the enemy is what we can take out of that. And the center of gravity is like, where they get their strength. So we destroy their center of gravity. Right. And so they look at these things and they sort of come up with the idea of that the way that you win is you have a decisive battle. And if not one decisive battle, 2 or 3 or however many it takes to completely destroy the enemy. And once you've destroyed the enemy, you win. Like that's what you're aiming for. Is you're getting to the point where they are no longer able to contest, like where they have no army, so you don't need to pay attention to them. That's very much the American view. And it sort of misses the mark because, obviously the point of Clausewitz is that war is a way of achieving a political end.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing that you're trying to do is actually achieve that political end goal. And when you're fighting the war, it's not supposed to be about destroying the army of the other side, which, that might be the way that you achieve your political end, but it might not be. right? For example, if you're in Afghanistan or Iraq or Vietnam, destroying the other side's army is not how you achieve a political victory. Like that's not how you achieve your ends.
Yeah.
Right?
In case people forget, in Afghanistan they disbanded the army. Or was that Iraq?
That was Iraq.
They disbanded the army, and then like they were in a position to control it, and so they didn't have a force to maintain security, I guess.
Yeah. So like they disbanded the civil service and the army, and that created a lot of ongoing problems. In Afghanistan, similarly, they defeated the Taliban, but then they didn't create a political structure to maintain order, which was, to a degree, that was the goal, was having a political outcome. Instead, they achieved this military thing of destroying the enemy, and then it was and now what?
Right. So in a way, you're saying that because of, the US military, I guess, has a heritage of divorcing the military goal from the political goal, and so therefore they're sort of disjointed, and
right, and
they can achieve military victory and still lose the peace, I guess.
Right, they can even lose the war. So there's this somewhat famous story where a U.S. colonel after the Vietnam War was at an embassy function of some sort, and he met one of his counterparts from North Vietnam, like a North Vietnamese general. And this colonel goes up to him and says, "You never beat us on the battleground. Like you never defeated us on the battlefield, not once." And the general looks at him and says, "That may be true, but it is irrelevant." Right. And so the colonel keeps repeating the story about how, like, the Vietnamese lost. That's what you have to understand, right? That they lost, they admit it. I spoke to him, and he said it was true, and he admits that he lost, and we were stabbed in the back. Like, somehow we ended up leaving, even though we were winning on the battlefield.
Right. Yeah.
Like, he still can't wrap his head around the fact that the other guy was right, that, like, it was irrelevant. Like, that wasn't what mattered in terms of winning the war.
Right. Yep.
Right. And I think that disconnect exists throughout the military, that there's very much this understanding of, like, the military does the military thing, which is blowing stuff up. And the politicians do whatever they do, as long as they stay out of our way. And that's a problem, because obviously what you're trying to achieve is, some political outcome. And I think that strategic vision of how do we destroy this thing so that they can't threaten us anymore? Or how do we destroy them so that we no longer care what they say because they have no way of expressing it? That has permeated their approach to cyber. It's very much they're looking at it from how can we use cyber to damage the other side to a point where they're no longer a threat?
Right. How can we augment our military capabilities with this magic cyber stuff?
Exactly. And I think it falls into the same trap where you're going to have this sort of Vietnam thing of, like, you never defeated us in cyberspace. The other side goes, that may be true, but it is irrelevant.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it's you can win all the battles and still lose the war.
Yeah.
And that's very much
yeah. You can conduct sterling top-notch cyber operations and not achieve what you want to achieve. I guess.
Yeah. So that's like, breaking that kind of thinking is one of the reasons I've been thinking about this, like, this Discord sort of attack, is that it goes against the grain of how do you destroy things to win, right? By looking at how do you foster winning without destroying things? Like, how can you create the conditions for victory without having to smash everything? Like, how can cyber achieve that without having to turn off the lights or make the ATMs not work? Like, what are things that you can do?
It's like, I like unorthodox thinking. Like, I like counterintuitive stuff. This feels to me counterintuitive, yet at the same time kind of useless. it's in that I struggle to see like the
practical application.
Yeah,
that
that's
actually
right.
works.
Yeah, and I what occurred to me is that in most of the organizations or structures that I'm aware of, that the offensive cyber places, the places that would do this cyber gifting, sit within the military. And they talk about offensive cyber in a military kind of way. They talk about cyber fires. They talk about, being able to achieve military objectives. A military objective is not to be nice to people. Well,
I mean, it should be though, right? Like that's.
Well, I guess
that's sort of coin, right? Like that's hearts and minds, but it's.
Yeah, maybe that's a. Yeah, so the this makes me think that perhaps all these that the structure for that kind of thinking is just wrong.
Right. I agree. Like I think that,
and so either we'll never see it, which I think would be a shame. I think it'd be nice to be able to talk about a kind of cyber gifting operation.
Yeah, if anyone wants to cyber gift me, it's like, so like basically I have, I believe, a good basis, like this good idea where I know there's this thing you can do and I know that it will achieve something. I don't necessarily have a good concept of operations of how to get from here to there, you know? I've got this great beginning.
It's the underpants gnome of offensive cyber. Step one, give away stuff. Step three, profit.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thanks, Grugq.